Hi, this is Maggie from Crafts the Charm. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I'm so glad you're here. Today I want to make a faux concrete vase. It's still kind of chilly outside, so instead of trying to work with concrete outdoors, I decided to make a faux concrete vase indoors. And I'm going to begin with this cardboard box. This is a really thick cardboard, and I would recommend working with a cardboard that is quite thick. And if you don't have a corrugated cardboard box that is really thick cardboard, maybe glue together 2 pieces of corrugated cardboard. So what I want is to have a 2-inch by 2-inch by 8-inch vase. So what I'm going to do is cut pieces of the cardboard that are actually more like 4 inches by 8 inches, and I'm just going to use where this cardboard box is already folded as the middle of those 4 by 8 inch pieces. So I'm going to cut 2 of those, and I'm just using a box cutter knife and a metal ruler and a cutting mat to make sure that my cuts are nice and straight. And then I'm going to cut a piece of the cardboard that is 2 inches by 2 inches square for the bottom. I'm then going to glue this together using hot glue. And because it isn't holding a really nice shape with really good right angles at the corners, I'm going to tape around this box with masking tape and sort of pull it into a correct shape with the masking tape. I'm also going to tape down the sides where I glued it and also a little bit at the bottom. Now to cover this and give it that faux concrete look, I'm going to use homemade air-dried clay. And you can make this out of baking soda, cornstarch, and water. In fact, I keep my baking soda and cornstarch in a bag with the recipe. So you want to combine 2 parts baking soda with 1 part cornstarch and 1 part water. Combine those in a pan and heat them over medium heat, stirring constantly until you have a clay. Once you have that clay, you're going to want to put it in plastic wrap and wrap it tightly to keep it fresh. Now I usually do this by volume, which is the correct way to do this, but this time I did it by weight, which is not the correct way to do this. So I used 400 grams of baking soda and 200 grams of cornstarch, and this is too much cornstarch. I had to use quite a bit more water, maybe 300 grams of water, I'm not sure, I didn't measure. But it resulted in a clay that was a little bit dry, and I'd say even a little bit heavy. So don't do it by weight, do it by volume. So put it into a measuring cup and measure it that way. Now, pretty simple next step. I just covered the vase with the air dry clay, and I covered the top and went down into the inside of the vase at the top a little bit so that you wouldn't see the cardboard. And I also did the bottom of the vase. And the first thing I did was really just try to get it covered. And then once I had it covered, I used a little bit of water to smooth it out. So you can get it quite smooth if you put water on your fingers and then rub them over the clay, or if you spray a little bit of water on the clay and then rub it. But I don't want this to look handmade. I don't want it to look like it is made out of clay, which it is. I want it to look like it was concrete that was poured into a form. So I really need it to have very flat sides and maybe even with a little bit of texture on it, which would have been left by the form. So what I did was I wrapped it in parchment paper and I used my metal ruler to press on it to give it straight sides, and I pressed on both the top and the bottom as well to flatten out those edges. To further give it the look of concrete, I took the end of a paintbrush and pressed some holes into all of the sides of the vase, because quite often when you see poured concrete, it does have holes in it, I'm assuming from air bubbles. Now you are going to want to reserve some of the air dry clay. Just wrap it very tightly in plastic wrap. You might even want to spray a little water in there with it to help keep it moist. So as the vase dries, cracks are going to form in the air dry clay. I have never used air dry clay, either homemade or purchased, such as Model Magic, that didn't form cracks. If there is a secret to using this without getting cracks, please do let me know, because this is something that always happens to me. So what I do is I fill them in with more air dry clay. So as this dried, as cracks formed, I would just take some of the leftover air dry clay and rub it over the cracks to fill them in, trying to get it in the crack and not too much on the surface of the vase, because I want to retain that texture that I have. I will have to sand it some, but I don't want to sand it too much. Once it was completely dry, I did then sand it with this sanding block that I have from the Dollar Tree, or this is a piece of a sanding block from the Dollar Tree. And when I was sanding, and I do think this is because of the mixture I used for the air dry clay, one piece came off of the bottom of the vase, and I glued that back on with white glue, school glue, PVA glue. And then there were a couple of places where it had crumbled away, so that when I glued it back, that didn't completely fill in the hole. I just put in a little bit more of that reserved air dry clay. Once it was completely sanded and repaired and dried, I wiped off the dust from the sanding with a damp paper towel, and then I sealed the vase with matte Mod Podge. Now, to paint the vase, you know that when I do a painting technique, it usually isn't just one color, because I think that can give a sort of a flat look, and I like for my pieces to have some dimension. So I started with this apple barrel granite gray, and honestly, if I were doing this again, I would not use this paint, because this has a lot of blue in it, which I didn't realize when I first put it on. And although painted concrete is often painted with a gray that does have a bluish tinge, I didn't want this to look like painted concrete. So I would probably just mix black and white acrylic paint if I were doing this again. But this is what I did. I painted it entirely with the granite gray. And then I mixed some burnt umber, a little bit of black, and a little bit of the granite gray with quite a lot of water. And I washed that over the entire vase and then blotted it off with the paper towel. And I think it's probably fine at this point, but for some reason I felt like I wanted it to have a little bit more brown in it, so I took the burnt umber and some white acrylic paint, mixed those together, and dry brushed that over it. So got a little paint on the brush, got a lot of the paint off of the brush, and then brushed it over the vase. And then I also brushed just a little bit of the burnt umber by itself over the vase. And then finally I did seal it with Mod Podge again. Now I did this because I didn't want the paint to chip off, but it did give it a little bit of a glossy finish, even though this is matte Mod Podge, which I do not like for a concrete look vase. So I probably wouldn't do this step if I were going to make it in the future, and I think I would just hope that the paint would not chip off. It's a vase, so it probably shouldn't get too much handling. And here's the finished faux concrete vase. Now, for this second vase, I was trying to do a sort of industrial look vase, and you'll have to tell me if you think this is successful or not. So for this vase, I really wanted it to be made of this jute rope, and I purchased this at the Dollar Tree. This is the 8-foot rope, so it's a little bit thicker than the other rope. And this is going to be a coil basket. I am having so much fun making these coil baskets. They are pretty straightforward and easy to make, and I'm just having a lot of fun trying different variations. So to do this, you're going to want a paper clip that you've straightened out with just one hook at the end, and this is a large paper clip that I have straightened out. It is also helpful to have a yarn needle if you have one, but you can do this without a yarn needle. I'm also going to use a little bit of this 18 gauge aluminum wire, which I bought at Home Depot, and it was pretty inexpensive, and it's very easy to bend. It's very soft wire. And we are going to use this charcoal tweed yarn, which I bought at the Dollar Tree. Now start by cutting a good length of the yarn. So you could measure out maybe 50, 60 inches or so. And what I'm going to do is whip the end of the rope with the yarn. So first, if there's any tape on the end of the rope, you can take that off. Make a loop with the yarn. Point the loop end of the loop, towards the inside of the rope, and start wrapping away from yourself at the end of the rope over the loop that you've made. Once you have almost covered it, put the yarn through the loop and then pull the end of the loop from the other side, from the end of the rope. This will pull the loop under where you have done the wrapping, and then you can pull both ends a little bit tight, and then you can trim the end off. Then you're going to continue to wrap the yarn away from you around the rope, covering the rope. So make sure it's close enough together that you can't see rope through it. So once you're able to, bend that over and wrap around both pieces, but make sure at the bend that there is a hole there, because we're going to need to put our hook through that hole. So don't wrap those two pieces completely together. And you're going to wrap maybe 10 times. You need to wrap until you get to that hole, and then you're going to pull the yarn up so that it's between where you're wrapping and where you wrapped previously, the coil below, and you're going to use your hook to pull that yarn through the hole and then bring it back up between, just as if you had never done it. Pull it tight and continue wrapping. And you're going to do that every 10 wraps or so. If at 10 wraps you can't do it because there's already a sort of a connection there, then just go a couple of more or a couple of fewer and pull your yarn through. So you're going to continue to do that. Wrap around and then connect it to the coil below and then continue to wrap. At first it is difficult, it might hurt your hands to hold it tight and wrap, but it becomes easier the more you do it. So once I had the base of this vase to the size that I wanted, which was about a 4-inch diameter circle, then when I connected the coil to the coil below, I pulled it up on top of the coil a little bit. And this is how you determine the shape of your vase, by how much you overlap that with the prior coil. I only wanted the bottom of my vase to be wrapped in black because I wanted for part of my vase for us to be able to see the rope. So once I had the base and then 2 coils on top of that, I finished off with the black. I did that by wrapping around the top coil and the coil below a few times, and then on the inside, threading the end of the yarn through the few wrappings that I just did to secure it. Now, after this, for a few coils, I'm going to use that aluminum wire to connect the coil to the coil below. So I am cutting 4-inch pieces of the aluminum wire, and I think if I were doing this again, I would cut maybe a little bit longer, more like 5 inches. And what I'm doing, because it is so easy to bend, is just threading it through the bottom coil and then bending it up over the bottom coil, or not the bottom coil, but the one that I'm connecting the current coil to. So the one right below the one I'm working on. Through there, up in the middle, and then over the top of the one I'm working on, and then folding them over each other in the front. But I would make it a little longer if I were doing this again, and then bend them again and push them in towards the inside of the vase. That's what I did after I had already put them all on. Then I took my needle nose pliers and bent the ends of them inwards so that there are no raw edges sticking out. But if it were a little bit longer, it would be easier to do, and we could do it as we go. After about 3 coils this way, I ran out of my 8-foot length of rope, or I was about to run out. So what I did was I attached another rope to this rope using that same whipping technique. When I'm attaching 2 pieces of rope with the whipping technique, I do use a little piece of masking tape to secure the ends together. It does make it easier to do the whipping over them, but I just secured the new rope to the old rope using some jute twine and a little bit of masking tape and that same whipping technique, except over the 2 ends to connect them together. And then I continued with the vase using the new rope. So once I had 4 rows or coils of the vase using the aluminum, I decided to do the top of the vase with the jute twine. So I continued with the jute twine just as I had done with the yarn before. Cut a length of the jute twine, lay it along the rope and start wrapping away from myself, or from the inside of the vase to the outside and over the bit that I just laid on the rope, and then continuing pulling it under, and attaching it that way. And because it's the same color as the rope, really wasn't much of an issue to be going down into that coil that I had attached with the aluminum with the jute twine. I don't think that it's distracting the way it would be if there were 2 different colors. I did 4 coils with the jute, and then I wanted to finish it off with something that related back to the aluminum below. And I think this was probably the least successful part of this vase. This is why I'm not thrilled with it, because what I used was a silver colored florist's wire, which I bought at the Dollar Tree. And I wrapped that around using almost the same technique that I did before, except I brought some of the jute twine along with me. So in other words, I have both the jute twine and the silver wire. I'm wrapping the silver wire over the coil, but when I get to where I need to fasten to the coil below, I use the jute twine. That way it matches the coil below. Then I just bring it up and lay it along the rope and continue wrapping over it with the silver wire. But I wasn't able to get the silver wire looking very uniform, and that's why I don't like this top row. It's just messier looking than I would like. So once I had completed the top row, what I need to do is finish off with the silver wire. So I cut my rope, so I didn't quite use 2 pieces of the rope. And then now that I am over silver wire, I don't need to connect layers with the jute twine anymore. So I can wrap just in the same way that I finish off any basket. I'm going to wrap over both the row below and that top piece, which is tapered and is ending, and then take the end of it and put it under what I just wrapped to secure it. So here's the finished vase that I'm not so thrilled with, and I actually really do like it to hold my paintbrushes. It's on my desk right now, but I wish that I had liked the top of it, because I think I would be using it as decor if I had been able to finish it off more neatly at the top. Do tell me in the comments what you thought of both of these projects. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.